Hello, my dear Earthlings. I welcome you to yet another episode of Little Modular. Today we will focus on this little bugger, Pico R&D, which is super small and super useful. There are certain modules that really do not require much space, and in my book these kind of modules are random sources. Because if you think about it, you really don't need to tweak a lot on such a module. It's not an oscillator or filter where you really need a hands-on experience and you need those knobs to control those things. No. Random source mostly is you just stick a cable in there and it gives you some chaos, right? That's it. So happily, Eureka Synths is one of those companies that have understood that. Hence, we have the Pico R&D. It's super simple and super useful. It gives you really a lot of functionality. What you just heard a few minutes ago was a patch that was almost entirely filled by this module. The only other modules were audio sources, bang, and a bass drum, and an external clock to make sure that all of this stuff is synced together. So let me just take you through the whole thing and explain how I used it in my patch. First of all, this can have its own clock with this knob right here taking care of the rate of the speed. So it's faster and slower, and you can see those two LEDs right here indicating the rate of the thing. The red LED indicates the speed of sine wave, pulse, and sample and hold, and the red LED indicates the activity of the R&D pulse. So actually all of the outputs are influenced by the rate, whether it is clocked by its internal or external clock, except the last output, which is a simple white noise source. So you can have it clocked internally, or you could clock it externally like I did. You just plug your clock source into the clock in right here, and the moment you do that, this knob changes into a divider multiplier. So if you have it set on noon, it will just give you what you feed it with. So it's 1-to-1. Now, if you turn it counterclockwise to the first partition right here, this will divide the clock by 2. If you move it further to the 9 o'clock position, a second partition, it will divide by 4, and the last position right here is divided by 8. Same thing goes for multiplying. First partition from the noon multiplies the signal by 2, then it multiplies it by 4 and multiplies it by 8. This is how it works. Okay? So then below clock input you have a sine out. This is a simple sine wave. You can use it whatever you want. Nothing special, but useful. Below you have a jack labeled pulse. This is actually a gate output with random duty cycle. Really useful, for example, for triggering envelopes and VCAs. That's what I did here. I have connected this pulse output to MATS, so I have a control over attack and release, and then from MATS back into mix 3 by Runalog, which in my case acts as a VCA that is fed with bang. Below you have a random pulse, which is just a random trigger. This one is used for triggering my bass drum. I turn it up so you can hear it, okay? Bass drum, and again my melodic stuff, okay? You can of course use it for anything else. I have just used the most obvious scenario here so you can understand it better. Below you have sample and hold, and I have used that as a source of pitch for quantizer. So actually I wanted to modulate 1 volt per octave input on bang, but I wanted to be more predictable and melodic, so I have fed it to tip-top quantizer first, and then out of tip-top quantizer back to bang, so I can, as you can hear, play with it, change octaves, change scales, and do a lot more other stuff. I have reviewed this module some time ago, so check out the other video on this one. It's a really great quantizer. And the last output right here is a noise output. I have fed FM in on bank with this. So let's recap. External clock, then I'm using SiMe out of Pico R&D that I'm using for modulating the chunk input on bang, okay? Then I'm using pulse to open my VCA. Then I'm using R&D pulse for firing the bass drum. Then I'm using sample and hold for modulating volt per octave input on bank. And then on top of that, I am using the white noise to feed FM in on bang again. So as you can see, I have animated a whole patch using exclusively this little tiny module. But of course, you don't have to play safe. You can introduce a little bit of rockstar factor to this patch. So instead of patching the noise out to FM in on bank, what I'll do is I put it back to the clock in. And let's see what happens right now when I turn up the mixer. You can hear some really, it gives you this erratic lo-fi thing. We can also try to patch it to sample and hold output and see what happens now. It also gives you some crazy, totally unpredictable bursts of signals. So if you want to get really rowdy with that, you can just use it this way. So as you can see, many uses for this thing. I have only scratched a surface. I use it in almost every patch. Last but not least, it is cheap as chips. So be smart, check it out. Thank you very much. If you liked that video, you know what's the drill. I'll see you next time. Take care.